So today I've got a little bit something special. Finally hit a milestone with the old Ford, my 97 F150 Lariat 4x4. That's been coming, but because of the current virocalypse has been a little bit delayed because I haven't been driving quite as much as I normally do. But as of right now, the truck is sitting in my carport with exactly 300,000 miles on the odometer, which is pretty good. To me, that's the first vehicle I've ever owned that has gotten that many miles on it. I've had a couple go over 250. I had one that I bought new that I put 240 on before I sold it. They were still running good. That was the old Stratus, if anybody's been around the channel that long. But I've gotten a few questions over the years on specifically this truck as to why I bother. Because it's an old truck. I mean, it's a 1997, just turned 300,000 miles today. And I basically built this whole channel, or the vast majority of this channel, making little silly videos about how to fix weird stuff on old first-gen Triton Fords. And I've gotten a few questions like, why do you bother? And I've told this story in the comments once, just because someone politely asked what was the point. And so I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I currently have this truck and why I'm going to currently, or I'm going to continue to drive the truck. First, it's cheaper than buying a new one, no question. The big Dodge I have, I bought that because I didn't need it, but I wanted something that was going to pull my trailer better than the way I was abusing the half ton. But that thing's $800 a month. I got a good deal on it and financed it short term, but still, it's kind of ridiculous. But this Ford, I paid, I've never had a note on it, and I might put $800 a year into it from a maintenance standpoint. Now that everything's fixed, I doubt I even put that much. If I look at it over the last 10 years of ownership, there's no way I've put $8,000 into that truck, including buying it. So for that, it's cheap. The insurance isn't as expensive as a new one. I don't keep full coverage on it, so it just makes more sense to me to do that if you can. Now, if you had to pay a mechanic to do something like that and keep something running like that, then yeah, absolutely, it's going to kill you, unless you have extra cars and don't mind paying a lot of labor. But if you've only got one car, I wouldn't recommend driving a 21-year-old anything, or 23-year-old or 24-year-old or anything, let alone a old ratty Ford. But that's part of the story. The second part of the story, and really the first part, is the first part of the story. I met the original purchaser of that vehicle in 1997, probably about a month after he bought it. I think he had traded in a mid-90s Chevy or an early 90s Chevy truck, I think. Might have been an Acura, but I didn't know him before he had this truck. So, but his name was Kent Schnable, Steven Kent Schnable. He was from Texas. I went to University of Texas, that I recall. But I met him. He was one of the engineers at the Kimberly-Clark diaper plant, Huggies plant in Paris, Texas, when I moved down there in April of 1997. And, we became good friends. And I spent 3.5 years down there. That's where I met my wife. I enjoyed Paris, Texas. It was a good place for me at that time. But back to Kent. So he bought this truck new in 97, and he is probably at the time the most detail-oriented car carer for person I've ever encountered. And he was like that with pretty much all of his mechanical stuff. His boat was perfect. His car was perfect. Hell, he was pretty much perfect. I'll put up a couple of pictures from my wedding if I think about it to show you. A couple of pictures of Kent. And but he took brilliant care of everything. And so the truck was in good hands. I don't think he had a lot of problems with it. Certainly not in the time that I knew him. and or I knew it. And we moved away from Paris in 2000, shortly after I got married. We moved up to Connecticut. And Kent left Kimberly-Clark, and he went to work for Sabre, as I recall, doing some computer stuff for the airline industry in and around Fort Worth. And as guys do, we kind of lost touch. We emailed every now and again, but I don't know that I called him on the phone, and he didn't call me. But we still kept in touch. And if we went to Dallas, we'd stop in and see him and his wife Amanda, and we would see, we'd keep in touch as best we can that way. And in 2004, Thanksgiving of 2004, he was involved in a road rage incident, I think on 35W, maybe in Fort Worth, around 820, where he got the short end of the stick, and he didn't wake up. He was driving this truck at the time. But, that was not what anybody expected. He was 38 years old. And I'll post some links to the few news articles that I found that are still online from that time. So if anybody wants to read about them, a little more information is always good. But that was a mess. And so we went down there for the funeral and did our best to help Amanda, his widow, as best we could. And that was about it for that. So she kept the truck at that point because, it's always nice to have a truck. And this one was in exceptional shape. I don't know how many miles it had on it at that point. Probably quite a few. He drove a lot. He probably had 130, 140,000 on it at that point. And Amanda kept it. And in the late 2000s, 8-9 era time frame, she met a really nice guy, and they got together. And he already had a truck, or a newer version of this Ford. And so when they got together, she asked me if I wanted it. I said, yeah, I'll buy it from you. So I gave her what I felt it was worth at the time, and that was in December of 2010. I drove up there with my 2006 Durango, Hemi Durango at the time, towing my car trailer, and put this big pig on that car trailer, and then barely made it home with that Durango because it had an open rear end and it was wet. And when we were I remember trying to get that thing moving up a hill in the rain, and it was not having it because it was only two-wheel drive. It wasn't four-wheel drive. Last two-wheel drive vehicle I'll ever buy. But so at that point, I started twiddling around with it. I had like 5 or 6 cars at the time, so it was extra. But I wanted to keep it going, just because I knew how it had been cared for. So I knew that internally it was going to be good. It needed all the suspension stuff replaced that had worn out over the years. When I got it, it had about 195,000 on it, in that range, maybe 190 plus or minus. And that was late 2010. And over the years, I've done a lot of work to that truck to keep it up. But replaced all of the moving components, everything that could possibly be a wear part, I've definitely rebuilt or replaced. But the long block has never been apart. The heads have never been off. The bottom end's never been out. The air conditioning system in its entirety is all factory and never been opened. Transmission is 100% OEM, never been opened up. Transfer case, same thing. Beyond that, I'll have to say Kent was kind of big into car stereo. He had taken an 8-inch powered bazooka and put it behind the driver's seat, probably within 6 months of him buying that truck. And that thing still thumps today. I am stunned that a 24-year-old speaker could still sound as decent as that thing does for what it is. So yeah, if I ever put a stereo in a car, I'll definitely consider a Bazooka if they're still making them the way they did 24 years ago, because that one is still going strong and it's impressive. But so, 2 or 3 years ago, I sold a few other cars, and this became my daily. I figured it's just sitting there and it wasn't really doing much, so I started daily driving it. And that's when I really started fixing all of the small things that had happened, had worn out on it, like the brake booster, and rebuilding the rear end, and then changing the rear end over for disc brakes because they're just better, and changing the seats and fixing the dash and little things like that weren't too annoying if you only drove it once a month. But if you drive it every single day, I like having stuff that looks decent. Well, not from a cleanliness standpoint. I'm sure Kent's spinning if he ever gets a look at the way that thing looks right now, because it's a horrible mess, and he always had it detailed to the nines like everything else. But so I guess I'm starting to ramble at this point. But that's the story of the Ford, and that's the reason I started keeping it up. And now, it's sort of a tribute to Kent, and it's a good truck for a 24-year-old Ford, which is saying something. It really, it's only left me stranded the one time a couple of months ago when the fuel pump died when I didn't expect it. That's the only time that thing has ever gotten me stuck. And that was my own fault for putting a non-Ford fuel pump in it. So nothing against the truck there. That's the fuel pump. But yeah, so that's about it. 300,000 miles. It seems like a lot. I'm sure there's tons of these trucks out there that have more miles than that on it. I see them occasionally on the auctions with 360, 380, 400,000 sometimes. But I want to think that there aren't many in as good a shape from a no rust and mechanical standpoint than mine, because it's just been cared for its whole life. But anyway, thought you might be interested in the story of my old white Ford and why I bother with it. So, hope you're all having a good night. Take care.